Good evening and welcome to tonight's Fireside Chat. I'm Elayne Grace, CEO of the Actuaries Institute. We have an influential room of guests here in Melbourne, as well as people joining us live stream on YouTube. It's been an incredible week with generative AI at the forefront of everybody's mind, so it's very timely to be exploring data science through the lens of a company director. ChatGPT was launched just 12 months ago, almost to the day, and wow, what an eventful 12 months it has been. I note the incredible array of people in the room tonight, driving the digital customer experience and new business models for leading brands such as IAG, Suncorp, Woolies X, Coles, Seek, CBA, NAB, RACV and Telstra, so quite a mix. And consulting firms who are helping Australian businesses with their transformations, such as Quantium, PwC, Ernst & Young, and IBM. Welcome to you all. Our special guest tonight has an extensive director career, currently a non-executive director of Coles Group, chair and non-executive director of the not-for-profit Fitted for Work, and a deputy chancellor and council member of the University of Melbourne. She has also previously been the chair and a non-executive director of Blackmore Group and a non-executive director of the Commonwealth Bank and Altium. Prior to her director career, she was an information, technology and management consultant with global leader Accenture. Please join me in welcoming Wendy Stops. So I would encourage those joining via live stream, please pop your questions into the chat when and as they come to you. So our team here will communicate them to me at the appropriate time. I have a set series of questions to ask Wendy, after which I will invite you both in person and streaming audiences to ask your questions online. So let's kick off. So on its hype circle, Gartner has generative AI at the peak of inflated expectations. What are your views on the current generative AI landscape? And what does it mean for business?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think ChatGPT really opened people's eyes around generative AI, and so I'm not surprised that it's sitting at the peak of the hype sort of thing, as we know those sort of things take off. But you know, AI has been around for a long time, many years. And it's really probably only in the last 2 or 3 years that some of the sophistication that comes with AI has really started to come to the forefront, and generative AI is an example of that. So I think for businesses, it's there's no doubt that AI is something, if they're not thinking about, then there's probably something wrong because they should be thinking about it. But I also don't like to think about AI without thinking around data analytics, because they're very intricately tied together in my mind. So, most businesses usually have some form of analytics, and they're doing something with analytics, albeit maybe at fairly early parts of the maturity curve these days. But if they're not already into that, then they're definitely in trouble, because that analytics is definitely the start before you sort of move up the scale and get into more advanced AI. But generative AI, it's exciting. I think the hype is probably warranted, just given some of the what we've seen happen. But I think businesses have a real opportunity to use it in many different ways. That's more than just what ChatGPT talks about.
It's very exciting. I think we can all remember what it was like before the iPhone. It's like before the internet, and it really feels like this is one of these moments in time. Yeah. So I guess the other interesting question, especially given the last week, has AI been truly democratized? And will this soon become a winner takes all or winner takes most markets? So
interesting, yeah, democratized. Look, there's no doubt, if you go back a few years ago when I used to dabble in some AI stuff, it was pretty technical, and it involved people that really understood a lot of it, and the data scientists. I don't think we even called ourselves data scientists back in those days, that people. And now there's no doubt that there's lots of tools out there to help you. It can help you, with your interfaces, user interfaces, and all the cloud-based applications and things like that. So, I was looking at a slide that I saw the other day in a presentation that had a lot of software solutions for the AI and analytics space, and it literally was an extremely crowded slide that probably had 350 to 400 solutions mentioned on it. So there's no doubt there's a lot of things out there. Is it truly democratized? Is it at the point where you can say, well, we don't need the scientists anymore. You know, I can just, it's a bit like if you think about creation of websites. Back in those days, you needed someone technical to create your website. Now pretty much anybody can create their own website. I don't think AI's got to that point yet, but watch this space.
Yes, it'll be interesting. It's quite a complex ecosystem of partners and vendors in the data analytics and AI space, I guess what you said there, each of which might bring different risks and opportunities. So what does strategy and governance look like for company directors when it comes to partners and vendors?
Yeah, it's interesting because I tend to think of it in some respects no different to any partner or vendor that the company may be looking at, you know, bringing on board. You know, have we thought about why we need them? Have we looked at what our various options are? Have we understood what risks come with them? So, you know, like any supplier or vendor nowadays, you're wanting to understand how secure are they from a cyber perspective? You know, what data do they need to use? Do they need to have access to, and how secure is that going to be? You know, do they have the sort of right skills as well to work within the company? You know, so there's a number of things you need to look at. And so when I think as directors, when we look at risk around, you know, partners and vendors, we're not the ones saying, oh, why are you thinking about X, Y, Z? You know, why aren't you thinking about A, B, C? You know, because chances are we have no clue who these companies are. But we're wanting to just make sure that they've done their homework and they've really thought through what problem they're trying to solve, and is this the best solution? And as I said, is it got the right security and the right skills attached to it, and so on.
It must be harder though with kind of in that innovative landscape where everybody's trying to kind of jump on the new thing, not miss out, compared to a more stable partner.
I think with the new thing, and I found myself thinking back when I was reflecting on that question to the days of when blockchain was the hype, right? And blockchain hasn't really taken off, right? So, and I remember being asked, actually, I think it was an interview for a NED thing, whether I thought, and it was a company that was planning on using blockchain big time. And what I thought about it, and I said, I'm not convinced. You know, I didn't get that one, by the way. That's probably why I didn't get it. You know, so, but I think I'm a bit more convinced with AI. I mean, I think there's definitely, you know, a lot of application, and we're seeing companies using it very successfully. You know, a number of the ones that I've been involved with and so on, using it very successfully. So it is a bit of a minefield out there, and it is hard, I think, for directors to be mindful of it. But the opportunity is pretty great, I think.
And so that probably leads me to my next question, which is, how do company directors guide management on the strategic direction in an era of breakthrough technologies?
Yeah. Well, the first thing you don't do is you don't say, where's our innovation strategy? Or where's our, you know, digital strategy, whatever. I mean, to me, it's all business-led. It's the business strategy. So you start with the business strategy. And if the company's not starting with the business strategy, then they've got their head around the wrong way. You've got to start with the business strategy. And by looking at that, then you're saying, well, okay, well, what are the problems or what are the opportunities that we're trying to solve? And therefore, then how does technology enable that? So how can we use analytics and AI and other technologies to enable that strategy and get us up that curve quicker? But also, you know, what's happening in our industry? You know, do we want to be the person at the front? Or do we want to be a follower? You know, particularly when it comes to innovative technologies and something like some of the, you know, generative AI or whatever. Do you really want to be the leader, or do you want to be a follower? You know, what are our competitors doing? That's important as well, you know, to just understand what they're doing. So I think all of those things come in as part of the business strategy, and then the technology sort of strategy and how you're going to use technology flows from that.
And I've got to ask the question of, how does Australia lead compared to other countries, or more how much do they follow behind, maybe, is some of the questions. Like, how can we make Australia more innovative and be selling our technologies?
$1 million question, right? I'm sure the government would love to know the answer to that question.
How can we encourage them to do more?
I mean, I don't think we are, I think in certain industries we are leaders for sure, you know, in terms of what we're doing. But we were probably leaders to some extent anyway. You know, if I think about the banking industry, and I'm sure some banking people in the room, and I think about some of the innovation, the technology, you know, that CBA and other banks have been doing, I mean, that's very world leading. And those companies overseas are tapping into them saying, you know, how did you do that? What are you doing? You know, so on. But you could probably go to other industries where we're not so world leading, you know, and we're probably struggling a bit, you know, behind to, you know, to catch up. So I think, but smart companies are looking overseas as well. Smart companies are going overseas and saying, well, what's happening over there? You know, what's the technology that's being used over there, and what could we do? Is there something we could innovate with or do here that maybe leapfrogs that?
Well,
or,
technology
you know,
allows you to leapfrog much
it
easier,
does,
doesn't it?
It does, especially today,
So for enterprises that perhaps feel a little lower down on the digital maturity scales, what tips would you have for embracing AI and ensuring future relevance and competitiveness? It must make people feel a little bit scared that they're going to be left behind.
Yeah, well, as I said, I think they've got to start with their business strategy. What is their strategy? But I think the thing that's, you know, a bit of a myth out there too is a lot of people think, well, I've got a lot of data. We've got a lot of data, so let's jump right into the AI and let's do something with that data, right? That's not necessarily how it's going to work, right?
No,
and having a lot of data doesn't mean it's good data. Doesn't mean that it's, you know, got the integrity and everything else. So to start, you've really got to start at the bottom and sort of think about, you know, as I said, there's a bit of a maturity scale there. And if you want to start, you start with just some basic analytics and you know, things like doing dashboards and things like that, where you're using some of the structured data that you've got. You eventually move up where you sort of say, well, now I'm going to give you a bit more we can give a bit more hindsight now, and then you eventually get up into more of the AI space where you say, well, now I'm going to get a little bit more sort of predictive about what we can do and a little bit more prescriptive. But you can't just, I mean, you can jump to the top, but you'd have to make sure all your basics are there in order to do that. And to me, the basics is the governance, the data, the quality, the integrity of the data, and so on. You know, and without that, you know, it's very hard to jump to something very sophisticated. So I think for those smaller companies that are just charting their way, just start at the bottom, work your way up. But, you know, have a look at what's going on in your industry and what tools and things are out there that you might be able to use. But keep your mind on the basics as well.
Yeah, it goes back to that democratisation question a little as well. You do need people, at least to start with a little bit of an analytical brain to be able to just compare what the numbers were before. Do they make sense? Is this something completely crazy? Because otherwise you could have crazy data going in.
Well, and I think the biggest mistake a lot of companies make is exactly what you were just saying there, which is, you know, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if the wrong data is going in or the quality of the data is not good and someone's just taking the results as a given,
you need to
then that can be very dangerous, right? You know, someone pointed out to me a few weeks ago, and I keep forgetting to go and do this, so you can all go and do this at home. Go and Google images of CEOs, right, or CEOs, right? And if you were going to you know, use that data of what does a CEO look like, whatever. Apparently, and it might have changed by now, hopefully it's changed by now, but all it comes up is all these, sorry to everyone in the room, white-faced males, right? And apparently the only female in there is Barbie. Because somewhere along the line, Barbie is a CEO somewhere,
CEO Barbie,
and
sure,
it might have been in the movie, or I don't know, no, it's not in the movie, I've seen the movie, it's not the movie. But anyway, so imagine if you were using that data, what that would tell you, right? So it's a very basic example, but I think it's a good example just to highlight that something that you think would be quite sophisticated, you know, what's a CEO, would come up with all sorts of dimensions and answers, you know, comes up with a very biased answer. So that's why the data is so important.
Yeah, and then the checks to make sure that the answers are halfway sensible.
Yeah.
So I have some 3 quick-fire questions to understand the company director lens when it comes to data science. So when executives and teams come pitching for innovation investment, what do company directors need to see, and how do they govern the ongoing monitoring of, so first of all, model relevance and understanding the model's assumptions?
Big question. Okay, so I think when management comes to the board pitching on innovation investment, the first thing I would say every time someone asks me this type of question is they very rarely come and say, we've got an innovative thing we want, you know, they're just coming with something they want you to approve. And from the board's perspective, on the surface, we don't often know whether this is an AI model or something else or whatever it may be. And so what we want to see is a typical solid business case. You know, what is this? What problem is this trying to solve? What options have you looked at? Why have you homed in on this particular option? Have you, as I said before, looked at what's going on in your sector? Have you looked at what's going on with your competition? So all of those basic things, right? And then if it gets down to the technology, it will then be, okay, so why this? Why are we going to go this fancy, AI, generative AI, style model versus something else? Why do you think this is the solution to what we need to do? How sophisticated is that going to, be? What tools and techniques are you planning to use to support that? What skills do we have to actually implement that in the right way? So it's really just, it may seem somewhat basic, but that's the way we look at it, right? Because usually most of the board are not technical experts, and they're more interested in making sure that it's solving a business problem and that it seems like we've done our homework. So, one of the things that comes with that is, okay, if we're going to use a sophisticated AI, so something that's very prescriptive or predictive or, using generative AI techniques or whatever, how do we make sure that this is not going to be biased, right? So it comes down to the question about the models, right, that you're asking about. So when you're looking at the models, the main thing from the board, and I'm always telling directors, just ask them to explain how the model works, right? And if they can't explain how the model works, then you've probably got a problem, right? Yeah. Now, obviously, the more sophisticated the AI is, the harder actually that explanation is going to be to give, because the black box is getting bigger and more complex, right? And it is a big black box. But they need to at least be able to say, well, what we're putting into the model is X, Y, and Z, right? And this is how we expect the model to come out. And so if you imagine, if you had a model in a bank, I'll go back to the bank example, where the model came out and made a decision on whether or not to give someone a loan, okay? Pretty straightforward, but I'm sure it's exactly what we've got out there today, right? Especially on a lot of the online apps, right? And let's say you were the customer and you got declined. What's the first question you're going to ask? Why? So if they can't explain why, then something's wrong with the model, right? The model's too complex or something. If they can't sort of at least explain enough of why, and the regulators may have different questions, and management, may have different questions, and the contract people might have different questions, So you do have to kind of be able to explain the model to a certain extent. And that's not necessarily easy. There's not a magic formula for doing that. But, and it depends, I think it depends too on who that model's touching.
Very much so. So in some ways, if you're approving the loan, the customer probably doesn't mind so much. But if you're refusing the loan, well, then you really need to be able to, like, from different perspectives, obviously. Yeah. You need to explain one side for your business to make sure that you don't take a bad loan, but dealing with the customer and not being consistent.
I'm going to tell you a story. Some of you may be aware of it. It's quite a funny. I think it's funny, but it's probably not funny for the family. But this family had a young girl, and this young girl, the AI technology was constantly recommending to this young girl things around babies. She was the 15-year-old or, whatever. So it was recommending, clothes for babies, nappies, all these sort of things for babies, whatever. And the parents went to, I think it was Target in the US, this is in the US, not in Australia, went to them and said, what are you doing? Why are you recommending all of this baby stuff to my daughter? Blah, 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 blah. And there was quite a hoo-ha about it, whatever. Turned out the daughter was pregnant. And she'd been Googling, and of course the AI tools pick up what she's been looking at and started recommending things around babies to her. So the parents didn't even know she was pregnant. So Target told the parents, basically, that the daughter was pregnant. So, that's one of the things.
This is the sensitive thing that society's going to have to deal with, because even though I think companies are trying to fix it and not do that kind of thing, they're not going to get it right all the time.
No, that's right. But, something's wrong in their model there, because the model would have been sending the results to a 15-year-old, which they probably knew in their model, and that should have raised an alarm bell to say, should we be doing this or not, kind of thing. So, again, that's the nature of these types of technologies and these types of tools. And so if you can't explain the model, if you can't sort of understand how it's going to work, then there is, it's fraught with risk, right?
And what about, like when you mentioned it before, but data quality and integrity? Because boards operate at such a high level. Like, I mean, how do you get comfort that actually that's good?
I don't know that we ever get comfort that that's good. It's because unless you're going to roll up your sleeves and start looking at it all yourself, it's quite hard. Yeah. But I think again, it really comes down to just the questions that the board asks around the data. So, to what extent are we using data in this model that's been determined by a human, or versus some very mechanical sort of type data? Is it data that's been input by humans and therefore it's open to mistakes and we're now using it in this model, or is it something that's generated out of very structured data that we might have? So we might have very structured data that's got people's names, addresses, places, all of this sort of type stuff. That's fine, but then we might also have some unstructured data. Are we using structured stuff? Are we tapping into, I don't know, video sources or things that are a little bit less defined? I think we can just inquire around where the data's come from.
Yep.
What sort of data are we using? Is it data that's been kind of flushed out and looked at from different directions? How are we looking at bias in that data? Do we have tools or techniques or whatever that enable us to test the data and make sure we're not going to create the bias that could come out of things? So it's really just throwing those sort of questions and getting a comfort level. And the minute you don't get a reasonable answer to something, the radar goes up, and so that causes you to inquire a little bit further and get into come back next board meeting and prove it to us, why this is okay or why this is, working okay. So, yeah.
Although presumably this is one of the other challenges in that typically STEM or technology people aren't always the best communicators. So it's a different language.
Yeah. But it's back what I said before. All of these things should be business-led.
Yeah.
So if there's not people in the business that understand the model, that's a problem.
Yeah.
You can't just say we've flicked it over the fence to the data scientists. I'm sure there's some data scientists in the room. We're not just flicking it over the fence to the data scientists and letting them deal with it. Or we're not saying, I've got this little problem, you go away and figure it out. Yeah. The business should be part of the process. And they should be able to, sort of sit down and work it through. And so that's why it's also important that the business is educated on this, right? Which is probably your next question.
Well, no, it's just in my head.
Because there's no point having a environment, as I said, where the business is so like, whoa, that's all too techie for me. Here's my problem. I just want you guys to solve it for me. They need to know enough about how data analytics and AI works in order to sort of sit down with the scientists and the data analysts and whatever and work it together. So they do need to get educated as well. They're not going to necessarily be technical experts, but they need to have enough. And, I like to talk a lot about, and Greg knows this, talk a lot about data for decision makers. If you're a decision maker, you need to use data and you need to use good data to make your decisions, right? Yeah. And so if you're going to use that, you've got to understand how that data's been formed, where it's come from, what information, where am I getting it from, what are the, explain it to me, those sort of things. Because if you're going to rely on it to make decisions, or even up the more sophisticated scale, you're relying on the technology to make the decision for you, then you want to be reassured that this is, really got the integrity that you need.
Yeah, it's quite exciting. You need business people to be really inspired and excited to know what's possible and brainstorm with the technology teams and then just work
I think of it a little bit like, if you think about it, there's hardly anyone in management today that in a leadership position that doesn't understand something around the financials of the company.
Yep.
They're probably managing budgets, they're doing stuff, whatever. And a lot of them would never have had an accounting background or a finance background or whatever. They've learnt that through the jobs that they've done, or as they've got into a position of seniority, they've had to go and learn more about that. To me, this whole space of data and data analytics and AI is exactly the same. And it feels foreign to people because it's got the word technology attached to it. And anytime you say anything to anyone about technology, including a lot of board directors, they all go, that's not something
I'm out of my depth.
I'm out of my depth, that's not me. But, you can learn about these things and you can get enough basic knowledge that you can use it for your everyday work and really use it to advantage. So.
So when you think of automated decision making, what are the approaches company boards can adopt to feel comfortable decisions can be explained and understood by humans, especially for critical applications such as those touching customers or employees?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit what we've sort of touched on before. You know, I think you do have to ask those questions around explaining it to me. And do
you think there's certain aspects that, like, when you're dealing with customers, are okay, and then other areas where they go, no, we just can't go there until we've built the confidence? So with customers.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think of, and I'll use the CBA example because I know it's public knowledge. You know, they have what they call their customer experience engine, and it's a very sophisticated AI engine that they built. This is probably going back 4 years ago now. So it was quite at the leading forefront, and they built it using millions of data points, you know, everything and anything they knew about that particular customer. And the whole idea was that the next time one of their people was interacting with a customer, this would tell them what some possible discussion points could be, right? So it's not given to the customer.
Yeah.
It's not sort of something that the customer all of a sudden goes, where did that come from, you know? But at the time, it was just there as a prompter for the staff, whether it was the teller, whether it was the, you know, the manager in the branch, or even some of the app sort of stuff or whatever, just a bit of a prompter to sort of just ask the client something, because it looked like, given all the data we had, that this could be of value to that client. I think something like that, that's a bit of a co-pilot, a bit of a helper or whatever, is probably, you know, again, not too bad, as long as it doesn't pop up and say, when are you having that baby? But, you know, as long as it's sort of, you know, just sort of, again, controlled and whatever. I think where it's more, you've got to be more careful is where it's something that customers directly interfacing with. So generative AI is a good example. A lot of generative AI now is used for chatbots, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, you get on there, and probably some of the ones that you guys use, for all you know, they're probably, you know, they're definitely an AI of some sort, you know, whether it's generative AI or not. But, you know, it's, this thing's talking to you, and it's concluding what the next question is it should ask you, or how it should interpret what you're saying or whatever. You don't want that thing sort of taking you down some path where you're like, what, you know, this thing's assumed I'm a male, I'm a female. You know, this thing's assumed that, or, you know, whatever. So it comes back to those, the more interactive it is directly with the customer, I think the more careful you have to be, and the more you have to do the testing and try all the different, come at it from different angles, you know, internally before you release that sort of thing to the customer. And I think a lot of companies have things like a governance committee or something like a frame, you know, where it might be an analytics or AI governance committee, and there'll be a group of people in the company that sort of pull these things apart. Right, and not only look at the business case for it, but pull it apart in terms of, is this going to work? Is this going to have the biases? Have we got all the right data? You know, is this going to be solid? And they test it, and, you know, all of that sort of thing. So I think if you're keen to do things that are much more interacting with customers or your employees or whatever, you need to have some more sophisticated level of governance around what you're doing, so that it's not just a free-for-all in the company, that there's a lot of sort of processes and policies and things that, you know, go around this, so that you minimise the risk of it becoming a problem.
So it's a lot of change in policy, isn't it? I'm just thinking things like data security, customer privacy, intellectual property, you know, allowing external partners gaining access to your data sets. So those governance committees must be busy at the moment, are they?
Well, look, and I think it flows up to the board as well. You know, some boards have technology committees, you know, where they specifically put some of these, you know, more sophisticated things in there. Some of them handle it through their normal audit and risk committee, because it is a lot of risk attached to some of the, particularly the more innovative technologies that you might use. So, you know, the board would like to know that the framework and the policies and everything is in place, and who's in charge of that, and what skills have we got. Skills is a really important one, because, as I said right at the beginning when we talked about democratisation, we haven't got to the point where you don't need some of those sophisticated skills, right? So breathe. All the data scientists can breathe. You're not out of a job yet, right? But, you know, I think it's important to understand that you still need some of those skills. And so, you know, again, the board would, I know I find myself asking, we've got a new, you know, head data guy. Oh, where's he come from? What's his background? You know, just part curiosity, but also just kind of doing a bit of a double check to make sure this person sounds like they've got the right experience that would work in the particular company, you know, that we're dealing with, sort of thing. So it is, you know, you need the right skills. I've talked about data. You need the framework and the governance around these things, and then you just need curiosity, I think.
Yeah, it's key.
Yeah.
Yes. So I guess tips for directors to govern resource allocation and, like when you mentioned before,
Yeah.
skill capability, particularly when it involves deep science, which may be beyond the expertise of, well, probably most directors when we're talking about really deep. And how do you become reassured that the right capabilities are available and of sufficient skills to achieve the outcomes desired?
Yeah, interesting question. And if anyone's involved with boards, or you want to tell your board they want to train their board, come and talk to me. We'll sort that one out. Because I do think boards, just like executives, need to be educated as well, right? Because you can't rely on the one person in the board that's got a bit of a technology background. You know, I've got a technology background, but as we were talking before the show, it's 10 years since I've worked in the field, and technology's changed a hell of a lot in 10 years. So even I have to do a lot to try and keep myself reasonably current, right? And being able to ask some of the questions, let alone the poor people on the board that have no technology background, right? And have no clue about some of this sort of stuff. So I think it is important for boards to get trained. I've talked about the importance, I think, of executives of being trained on this sort of thing so that they understand. And I think, what was the other part of the question? Skills, resource allocation.
Resource allocation.
Yeah, it's... I do believe that, and this is often a contentious point about how you might want to organise and where do you put the skills in the organisation. I think a lot of companies flip between, these skills sit within the technology part of the organisation, or do they sit in the business or whatever. I do believe a lot of them should sit in the business.
Yeah.
I think the real true data scientists, maybe a core pool of data scientists can sit in the technology organisation, but the people who are sort of deciding what it is we should do and how we want to do it and what problem we're trying to solve, and some more analysis and engineering of it, like a lot of that I think should sit in the business. Now that doesn't mean that it's purely the business people. There might be skilled data people who are part of the business, and then you can have a core sort of group of scientists who are crunching the algorithms and doing all of those things that you need to do. I think that works better just because it keeps the business in touch with it all the time. So, yes, the bigger the organisation, the bigger that group of people is likely to be. I know some organisations are probably represented here today might have tens or hundreds of people that sit in their analytics or their, AI sort of groups, and then you've got small, and you don't have to go very far down the ASX list to get down to a relatively small company that may just literally have a handful of people who deal with this sort of thing. So skills have been very high in demand. The last couple of years, I think COVID really pushed a lot of things online, pushed the whole technology agenda a lot quicker, and skills became at a premium. And so it was hard to get a lot of the right skills. And of course, the bigger organisations could pay more, so they generally fared better out of that. But I think it's settled down a little bit now. I'm seeing people sort of moving around a little bit more freely now, and I think most organisations, and if they don't have the skills themselves, the other option is to use an external organisation that does have some of those skills. There are some out there, who do that, and consulting organisations and so on that do all of that sort of thing. So you can supplement, but I don't think they should be the people that are making your decisions for you. They're the ones that are just maybe doing some of the, the model crunching and so on.
Do you think that with the current economy, the way it's going at the moment, that companies are going to, try and embrace this more to get more efficiencies or a step up? Or do you think, there's a general reluctance to spend too much money and that there actually could be a contraction of investments in this new technology?
Oh, no, I think the bigger companies are just going to keep powering away at this. Yeah, I
take
think
the advantage while they
take
can.
the advantage while they can and try and leapfrog their competition or, get ahead of the game. I think that because the technology has got sophisticated enough now, and as I said, there's a lot of tools and other things out there that, you can do, most things you would like to try and do. You've just got to have the right people to help you build it and make it happen. So I do think, particularly those that have got more resources at their disposal, maybe I'll say it that way, will certainly continue to forge ahead and keep moving ahead on this. And they really don't have any choice.
No.
because they'll get left behind.
Yeah.
Because what a lot of this AI and sophisticated data analytics and that does is it enables organisations to improve their productivity significantly, and well, if it's done right, obviously, improve their productivity significantly, and jump ahead and do more, in a shorter time frame. And so if you're not doing it, you're going to get left behind. So they don't have much choice. The smaller companies, I think, they're lucky that, in the sense that you could say, well, poor smaller companies, they're not going to be able to have the same things at their disposal, but all their peers are probably the same. Yeah. So it kind of is probably happening a little bit based on the sort of the size and the sophistication of the companies as to where they're going and what sector they're in. Some sectors are much more financial services, retail, they're really forging ahead in their space quite significantly.
And I guess that then experience gets distributed through the economy effectively anyway, because people move around, as you say, or
Well, I think you've got to remember, and this is the other thing I think that a lot of companies realise, is that the generations of today, the younger generations today, that's all they use is technology, and their expectations are very high about what they can get and how they can get it, and so on, and how quick they can get it. And so again, if you're not ahead of that game, they'll just go somewhere else.
We're all getting compared to Netflix, aren't we, in our delivery of customer experience or different things. It's,
if I want to get a loan and two of the banks are very quick on their apps and sophisticated thing, and I can get a decision fairly quickly, and the other two have said, well, we'll come back to you in 3 weeks' time. Where are you going to go if you're going to go to the first two? Because, you don't want to wait 3 weeks to. So, this is what's happening. The minute one organisation sort of leapfrogs a bit with something, the others are sort of forced to catch up and try and get ahead as well.
Exciting. So last question before I open up to audiences. So please get those questions in if you haven't already, or start thinking about them in the audience. I guess your observations on implementing and monitoring effective risk management and crisis management, like when we have seen some cyber attacks, that was, obviously Vodafone Optus going down last week. We saw OpenAI also separate from Sam Altman just over a week ago, followed by a loss of some top research talent, but then of course he came back. How can, I guess, company directors ensure their risk and crisis plans are effective, especially when you're really relying on deep technical talent to uncover new frontiers?
Yeah, I think the whole space of risk management on boards has gone up exponentially in the last few years. Probably started with the banking sector when I was on CBA board and whatever, with royal commissions and all of those sort of things. But there's no doubt that the regulators have upped their game as well, and that's not unique to the financial services industry. It's the same in other industries too. So risk is definitely at the forefront, and crisis. And I think the one that scares most companies the most is cyber. Is a cyber incident. We've seen what can happen with the cyber incident. So there's no board that I've been anywhere near, including my charity, that isn't talking about how secure are we, what are we doing, what happens if this happens, what's going to be our crisis plan if we all of a sudden found out we've been hacked, or we've had some customer data taken, or something like that. So the whole risk profile has gone up. I talk on my boards. If I ever see one of my boards say, well, we've got cybersecurity under control, and we think now the residual risk is only a medium risk, anymore, I just call BS on that, and get them to go back and do their homework and understand that tomorrow it'll be different. So you can never, that's one that can never, in my mind, can never come off the high risk list. And so, I think boards now are much more tuned into some of that, particularly around cyber and around data privacy, because again, you've seen a number of incidences around data, being leaked and so on. And so we do expect there to be good, solid risk management plans. We do expect there to be good mitigation, and we check on those regularly to make sure that they're being addressed. We'll get internal audits done in particular areas so that we've got someone, semi-independent having a look at it and making sure that things seem to be in place, and that the seriousness is there, and that the focus is there on. A lot of it is we want to make sure they're serious. I know of one board, just as another side conversation example, who told their new chair and new board or whatever that they were on top of cybersecurity. It was not a problem. They thought they were right on top of it. So the chair went and organised a external company. It's one of those ones, I don't know, they call it a black box, white box, whatever they call it. But anyway, they come in and they basically hack into your company. And you don't give them anything. And you say, okay, go for it. See what you can do. Took them 3 days. They got into everything. Wow. Including, and this is when it really scared the directors, when there was a video of a board meeting. They were in a board meeting and like as one of the people active in the board meeting. So at that point, the focus went up a big notch in the company, not just in the management who realised, okay, maybe we weren't in such good shape as we thought, but the board obviously started to pay a hell of a lot of attention to it as well. So, you know, so you want to do some of those sort of types of things, you know, at times to just check that, you know, yes, it's easy to be told, yes, we're doing this, yes, we're using the NIST framework, you know, or we're following the ACSC's Essential 8 framework, you know, and we've got this under control and we're this mature and that mature. Well, let's get some audits done on it. Let's get some testing done on it, some penetration testing, things like that. And then also, I think it's just the, it's not just obviously cyber. I talk a lot about cyber because it's such a hot topic, right? But I think the crisis management you talked about. I mean, most companies in the last 3 years have been through a crisis, right? There's this thing called COVID, you know, that can create a crisis for everybody, right? As everyone had to go online or offline or whatever the case may be. And it was a good test of a lot of companies' crisis management plans, whether they really were able to deal with it or not. And what I've seen that works well is you have a plan, so let's test it. And I've insisted on the boards we've been on, you know, the bigger ones are right onto this, but on some of the smaller ones I've even insisted that the board has to be part of that testing. It's not, you know, who's going to ring the chair of the board when something happens? How does the rest of the board find out? How are decisions made? Let's practice it. And so let's let's literally practice it. Bring in some external people to help us run the session, you know, whatever, and practice what we would actually do. Hugely beneficial for a company to really get their head around whether it looks like they've got holes in their plan or their processes or whatever, but also gives the board and management at least some comfort level that if something really does happen, we've at least got a plan and a process in place to deal with it.
Thank you very much. So much information there. So look, I would love to open it up to our audience here. Please raise your hand. There's a fantastic over here.
G'day, how are you? Great conversation so far, thank you. Absolute breath of fresh air, actually. I think recently we've seen, you know, the rise of the Chief Data Officer as a role within organisations, but it tends to be tucked in under either the CIO, who might be more concerned with uptime, or a COO or a CFO who have got different priorities. Do you see a seat at the top table for the Chief Data Officer over time, and what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I can't say I've formed a solid view in my mind around that one, but the more a company, I think, really starts to say we have to embrace data. Data is the thing that's going to make a big difference to how we make decisions in this organisation, and that starts right at the top. And dare I use that word, culture? You start to build a culture around how important data is to the business and driving the business. That's when I think you'll see the Chief Data Officer have a seat at the executive table, right? I think until organisations get to that point, their natural instinct is to put it in under the CIO, right? And that's not such a bad thing if the person's at least got a voice and they're at least at the technology table and, you know, and they pop out occasionally into the executive table for various things or at the board. You know, I've been on boards where they're not directly reporting to the CEO, but they've been in the boardroom, you know, for discussions and things like that. So I think it just depends on how you're doing it. Plus, it's that question, as I said before, about technical versus business. And so a number of chief data officers these days actually are more business people than they are technical people, right? So, you know, again, and that's because the business sees the importance of data and wants to give it a bit of a seat at the table and wants to have someone from the business sort of driving the thinking and how they're going to use data. And you can have all the, like any role, you can have all the experts underneath, right, who sort of fill the gaps on the knowledge maybe of that chief data officer. But personally, I think that's sort of a good way to go, but you have to get the right person, and that would be a difficult role to fill if you didn't have some of that background.
Another question here? Thanks. Just second row here.
No.
Thanks for the great discussion. So I have a question regarding the competition you're talking about. So I'm just wondering, like, say in the future, all the big companies, or even all the companies within an industry, they build out like a really fantastic AI toolkits within their range. How does the company stand out from all the other companies, given maybe like the power of AI is sort of equalized around all those companies within the industry?
Yeah, I think the tools might feel like it equalises it because, you know, 3 companies might be all got the same tools. But as I said, it's really comes down to the business strategy and what you're using it for, right? And how you've made the decisions and the data that you've used to put into those tools, right? And that's where I think the companies can stand out. You see a lot of companies now building partnerships and relationships with other organisations who have data, right? Because they know that if they can get their hands on that data, they can supplement it with their data, and they have a much more powerful base of information that they can then go out and produce things for their customers. Now, they might be using the exact same tools, similar models or whatever to their competitor or whatever, but because they've taken a different approach, you know, they actually still have a competitive edge. So I think it's probably no different to a lot of things in organisations. It will get to the point where everyone's kind of doing it and everyone's got the tools and a lot of them are the same, you know, and whatever. But it's the decisions that you're making with those tools, and it's the data that you're using to feed into those tools. And I guess some of the algorithms that are being executed there that's going to make the difference. And that's where the sophistication comes in.
Question here? Just, this
Oh,
one at the back.
one at the back.
Thank you. I just had a question for you on to what extent boards are talking about the ongoing maintenance of the value that you deliver, because in my experience, it's one of those areas that I see a lot of companies underestimating and underinvesting in, and a lot of the time you're talking about OPEX funding for it, which then gets cut, and you have this grand thing that you've invested a lot in to implement, and it very quickly degrades and doesn't get there. And I guess, how do you try and prevent that and build that awareness right from the top?
Yeah, well, I think one of the first things we do is when we have a business case for something, it's not just a business case on building the thing, it's the business case on operating it as well. So we expect them to be laying out how much OPEX or whatever this is going to take to run this thing on a regular basis and maintain it. Now, so that you know what you're heading in for, right? As you said, it's like you buy the you buy the cheap car and you think, well, how well you've done, and then you spend a hell of a lot of money replacing everything in the car because it just breaks down. So I think part of it is making sure that the business case is relatively sound as best as you can be when you're looking into the future, and that it's taking all the sort of things into account. I don't know how many times I've had the conversation that don't give me a business case that's just sort of the capex or the build spend, because nowadays a lot of it's not capex, a lot of it's OPEX, right, with the new rules. But don't just give me the business case on the build, give me the business case on the operate as well, because that's where it could end up costing a lot more.
I'll just ask a question here online, but it probably goes into that OPEX, CAPEX question. What's the mindset of directors when it comes to retiring tech debt? So I guess with technology changing so quickly and also these new rules, a lot of it is just being written off. Is that your experience?
Look, technology is such a hard space because you get into organisations and they've spent years building up complex technology.
And expect it to be.
And you can't just...
Depreciate over 5 years. It's not really realistic
you just
anymore.
can't sort of turn the switch off. And it's gone. Because usually that... and I'm sure you've heard it talk about the spaghetti ball. This integrates with that, integrates with this, and so it's very complex. So when you come along with something like, AI and data analytics and whatever, there's a a lot of the discussion is around where do we store the data to start with? How do we get the data out of the relevant disparate systems, and how do we put it in a place where we can then use it for other things, and we're not having to rely on the spaghetti code that's been sitting there for years. And you know, and that's where the architects, you know, the tech architects and everyone come into play. That's certainly not my foray, but you do want to get some comfort level that we're not just setting ourselves up to increase the size of the spaghetti ball, and that it's just going to become a bigger and bigger problem that we can never get ourselves out of, right? And I think when we start talking about retiring stuff, you know, sometimes that thing has been there for years. I won't tell what company, but I know some code I wrote in a company, and years later I was at a dinner, and I said, oh, you know, I used to consult with your company and whatever. I said, yeah, I wrote such and such a code, you know, and he goes, oh God, you're Wendy, you know, your name's still on that code, you know. And I was like, oh my God, I'm mortified. My name's still attached to this thing, and it probably looks nothing like what it did, you know. But, you know, this is what you've got to be careful of. And I think so as we start to, the good thing about a lot of these new tools and technologies and cloud and whatever is, a lot of companies now are not building their own big mammoth things. They're using stuff in the cloud, and which comes with its own risks, obviously, and attached with it. But so you're not necessarily going forward setting yourself up for that, but you've still got this legacy thing. And at some point you get to the point where the sophistication of the things you can use in the cloud is sufficient that you can gradually start to unwind some of the legacy. But it's from what I've seen, particularly in some of the bigger organisations, that's a multi-year exercise. It just is quite painful and quite slow. It's not that hard to just turn these things off.
I think we've got a question up here in the front. Oh, sorry, we will get to the front.
Thank you. It's a wonderful speech that's going on, and I really like the approach towards the data of how directors have been looking at it. One thing I just want to ask is, like, I've seen your comments on the disaster management, such as COVID-19 or something like a cyber attack that's happening in, day out with the larger organizations like Optus or something like that. So when it comes to something, such incident happening on a day-to-day basis, what would the director's approach on that day of happening the incident, and how, is it like a war room or something, or what's the
look, every company is obviously different, and if they've been doing their homework and they've got their good crisis management plan and they've got their things, then usually the chair will get a phone call fairly quickly, and the rest of the board will be pulled in fairly quickly. And when I say pulled in, I don't mean physically, you know, pulled in, but there'll be, you know, a call or a Zoom call or something. And a lot of it initially is just information, because we've just found this out. This is what's happening. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Here's what we're trying to find out. You know, if it's something like one of the tests I did that I talked about was around a ransomware attack, right? So, you know, here we've been hacked in, we've got this or whatever. Okay, let's meet again in 5 hours' time and get the latest update. When they came back in 5 hours' time, we've just got a ransom demand. You know, so then you're like, okay, right, that's just gone up a notch. So then you know, so sometimes it just depends on what the situation is and how critical it is. The first thing would be to understand whether it's any data, customer data in particular, or employee data, whatever, has been taken or leaked, or, you know, whatever the case may be, because that's obviously very critical. You know, I don't want to give an opinion on Optus and what happened with Optus and whatever, but God, I feel sorry for them. You know, because these things are very hard, because it's a little bit of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? Because if you say certain things or come out too soon, then everyone wants to know why you're not giving direct answers. And then if you wait and then come out later, why didn't you come out sooner? You know, I mean, there's just all sorts of things. But the media is part of the plan. It's not just an internal plan, it's also media, and what you're telling your customers and everything has also got to be part of your plan. So that's why I said everyone's different. It depends on the situation, but that's why you know, testing those sort of crisis management plans is a really good thing to do, I think, in a company.
So does the data approach differ from the prior the attack or after the attack, or after seeing someone happening this is sort of
When we see something happen elsewhere, I can tell you the first thing the board does at the next board meeting is says, okay, what have you learnt out of that particular situation, and what are we doing about it? Right, what have we done to go and have a look at what's going on in the company? How can we reassure ourselves that we don't have the same problem? And that's the first question. It's usually asked if you don't wait for the next board meeting. That question gets thrown on the table, but if the board meeting's relatively close, then we expect the answer. If it's a little way away, we might have a meeting in between to tell us, okay, how can we be reassured this is not going to happen to us?
And similarly, customers' expectations are pretty high these days.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So depending on your company, suppliers might be contacting you, or customers may be contacting you. Remember, sometimes these problems happen in suppliers. We saw the toll group thing, so it happens in suppliers. And so again, straight away, most of my boards will get an email that day from the whoever's leading the crisis stuff, sort of saying, okay, this has happened. They're a supplier to us. This is what happened. This is what we've done. We've blocked this off. We've chopped this off. We've done this. We're onto it, and we'll keep you informed. And then, depending on when they have more information, we'll get another update. If it gets to the point where it's now caused us a problem, then we go into our crisis management mode. Yeah.
Christian?
Thanks, Wendy. Great discussion. And I guess picking up on that theme around problems potentially outside of the organisation, I came across an article in the New York Times, I think it was, just a little while ago, talking about the way that AI uses workforces in low-cost countries to help with training and building the models. And I know that a lot of Australian organisations have done work on understanding their supply chains and looking at exploitation and some concerns around that. Just wondering if you've kind of picked up discussions around that sort of ESG responsibility that a lot of boards are taking quite seriously now, and how that lens may or may not have been applied to what's happening with AI, particularly generative AI.
Yeah, I didn't. When I talked about suppliers before, I didn't talk about the sort of human rights side of it. But it's clearly one of the lenses that we put on when we look at suppliers, whether it's overseas or in the country, to be perfectly honest. So, and that supplier may be an outsourced supplier for the technology part of the organisation, right? So I think we're I think the more sophisticated organisations are more switched on to some of that and making sure that we include that as part of what we review and what we understand. And a lot of it is when you sign up to work with those particular suppliers, is doing your due diligence and doing your homework on how they operate, where they operate, what do they do, how do they pay people, putting things in the contracts around us being able to do audits when we want to do audits. All of that sort of stuff, right? Because you need all of that in place. It doesn't matter whether it's a supplier of a good or it's a supplier of a service. You need to be reassured that they're doing all the right things, particularly from a human rights, perspective. Now when it comes to AI, I don't know that I'm aware of any that I've been involved with that have used overseas for AI specifically, but to the extent they do, they just fall in the same net as all the rest that we look at in terms of how we look at it and how we monitor things and so on. Yeah.
I'll just take a question from online. So if you're a medium-sized enterprise and you're buying in machine learning expertise, are you buying in machine learning expertise, or do you decide this is the future and sandbox your own large language model development because it will be a differentiator in the future? Do you have a sense of?
Oh, God.
I know. A poll from the audience.
Yeah. Look, I think it's the age-old question. I can go back to years when I was a consultant, right? Do you build it yourself or do you bring it in, right? And look, there's no simple answer to that, really. But I would say, the only thing I would say is back in the days when we used to have those debates, it was when building it or bringing it in was still going to take a long time. It didn't matter which way you do it. So it was more a case of, do we think we've got the skills and capability and we want to have that long term, or is this something that's maybe not mission critical to our business and therefore we can bring someone in to build it for us and then maybe they can operate it or whatever. So I think part of the answering the question is around how mission critical is the thing that you want done to the business. I'm still a firm believer that if something is relatively mission critical to the business, you probably should try and have control of it yourself. Now, control of it doesn't mean building it. right? Because again, if you think back to, when I first started in the industry, everything was custom built. You really didn't have any choice.
Yeah.
Then it went to software. And when software came in, there was always the question, but if we buy software, then the person next to us buys, so we'll both have the same thing. So then there was customization of software, so you ended up basically building it anyway. You made such a mess of it that it looked like something that was built anyway. And that's continued to evolve over time. So now you've got tools in the AI space that enable you to have, user interfaces and attach to this and some template algorithms and things like that you can use, but you've probably still got to do an element of building around that anyway. But the only thing I would say is technology is moving so fast today.
It'd be hard to build it completely on your own.
Yeah, if you want to build it on your own, good luck, because by the time you finish, chances are it's out of date.
It's out of date.
So, I think it's just, you've got to weigh that up, but that's just my opinion. My personal opinion is you shouldn't build it unless you really feel you have no choice.
It's great to hear, like, a lot of these experiences, you say business is business, the experiences we've had from technology in the past, there's still the same relevant experiences and questions we can apply to this new AI technology.
Yeah. And that's the
It
thing, I
doesn't
think
change
people
that
get
much.
scared off because it's technology and
Yeah.
it's AI. You just stick to your fundamental thinking. As I said, a business case is a business case. It doesn't matter whether it's to put up some sophisticated AI tool or whether it's to buy the business down the road or whatever. You've still got to go through the same due diligence and do the same sort of thing. So I think, that's important.
I love it the way you disentangle and reentangle technology and business. How often do you see that when they embrace A, data, and B, AI, the business case changes completely?
I don't know how often, because this is, despite how much sophisticated things got, I wouldn't say that every week I'm seeing a new business case coming up for AI or, whatever. I think a lot of these... Yeah, due to AI. Yeah, look, I think there's more coming up now. There's definitely more coming up. I think, again, sometimes it's not even obvious to the directors that it is AI until we get into the conversation and they say, oh, well, actually, it's, someone will mention the word algorithm or something will come up and all of a sudden you realise we're talking about actually an AI engine here that's doing something. Because I think we're more interested in just understanding what problem you're trying to solve and how are you trying to solve it. And do we think we've got our head around, got the right skills and the right data and everything to be able to do it. And if they can convince us of that, then great, let's move forward. And the price is right, obviously, to do that. The business case is right. But so I think we're seeing it come up more and more now. When we talk a lot about strategy, business strategy, there'll be some obvious things that pop out that they're going to use technology to do it because it's a sophisticated... you take a simple thing in a supermarket, you do a lot of ordering. You're ordering things all the time, right? Historically, that was all very manual, right? And they had to go and count what they've got and do stuff, manual. Now a lot of that can use a lot of AI and a lot of technology to help you do your forecasting and your ordering and, and all of those sort of things. So it's a natural progression. And as I said, if you don't do that, you're going to get left behind because guaranteed your competitor's doing it, or at least on the way to doing it. So, I think we're seeing it come up more and more now, and it's becoming more of a natural thing for a business to bring up because they just see it's the only way to move forward and do what they want to do, as opposed to a conscious decision, should I, do this with AI or not with AI, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
It finally found its way to you.
Hey. Yeah, following up his question, my question is, what is the proportion of successful projects according to the AI? Because I'm pretty sure that you've got lots of proposals, but how many of them are actually working?
Well, I can tell you, most things generally don't come to the board until they've been proven a little bit, right? Because as you would imagine, there's delegation levels, and for something to come up to the board, it's either extremely high risk and high profile, or it's big dollars attached to it. So most organisations will be playing with this for quite a while with various things before they bring something, up to a board. And so it's not clear to us how much of it gets, thrown in the rubbish bin versus how much of it actually finds its way up to us. Again, you used to hear of organisations talk about that, we've got an innovation hub. right? You know, innovation hub was a fancy word for putting a heap of people in a room who threw around ideas and tested things and see what they could come up with, you know.
The old HP model.
Yeah, that's right, in a quick sort of way, and if it didn't work, you threw it out and you tried something else, you know. If it looked like it was going to work, you took it to the next step, you know, and eventually if it got to the point where this thing, okay, we're ready to industrialise this thing and really turn it into big, then it would probably go up to a board with a business case. So we don't necessarily see a lot of what goes on, but I do know a lot of companies are playing with this. They've got teams of people thinking about where they could be using it and how they could be doing it and playing with it and testing it and trying to see if they can come up with something that can be industrialised. Because that's the important thing. I think you can always get something to work on a small scale. You know, blockchain did that. Blockchain can get something to work on a small scale, but turning it into a large scale application can be a lot more complex.
Thanks, Wendy. Great insight. In business-led AI, which business functions are you seeing coming forward with the most applicable business cases? I mean, it somewhat depends on the data sets, obviously, and perhaps advice to medium-sized companies who may not have the volume of data that a Coles or Commonwealth Bank have. How might that apply to them?
Yeah. Look, I think. Let me think about this. I think when you're looking at business strategy, most organisations will have some sort of strategy function, right? You know, and I think if the people within there are switched on to some of this, they will be talking with the business about, you know, what are you thinking about? What are you doing? What are we seeing elsewhere? What's happening overseas? What's happening with our competitors? All of that sort of type of thing. So I think the types of, you know, it depends, I think, on the sector that you're in as to what it is. But, you know, a lot of customer-related business units. So it might be the group that's customer service, for example. It might be the frontline sort of areas. Because remember, a lot of the reason for doing this is not only you know, giving the customers good service, but it's improving productivity in the business. So anywhere where you have some cumbersome, very manual and, you know, things, that's usually a target for these sort of things. You know, how can I use that and speed that up a little bit? So it really varies, I think, company from company. You know, if I looked at what the bank did versus what, you know, Coles does, it's different because they're different businesses, you know, and they're using it in different parts. Employees, internal, around employee stuff as well, you know, is a focus area for some. And obviously, if you're in manufacturing, and if you're not looking at robotics and all of the artificial intelligence that can be done around manufacturing, then you're probably about to go out of business, you know, sort of thing. So, so I think it just really varies depending on the business. The second part of your question, sorry, I forgot.
You know, particularly medium-sized organisations, which you touched on, but just, you know, how can...
I think most of the smaller ones are homing in on probably customer service oriented stuff because it's sort of the obvious part. You know, how can I improve what the customer service is? Because if I can keep my customer happy, then that'll keep them attached to me. And, you know, so I think a lot of them are homing in more on the customer service sort of side of things. But yeah, they, I don't think the smaller business should shy away from all of this, right? Just because you're a smaller business doesn't mean you still can't do this. You know, Blackmores was a much smaller business, but it was still dabbling in all of this and doing all of this, right? You know, so it just depends on, as I said, the nature of the business, the competitive environment, because all of those things play a heavy part in how quick or how slow you move in these sort of spaces.
So I've got a final question for you from online, which is an interesting one because we're all customers. So we're using data science to better understand and predict, but so much self-service is being pushed onto the customer. Do directors worry about the impact on the customer experience if we're kind of doing a lot of the work, I guess?
Yeah, that's probably a Coles-related question with self-checkouts. Yeah, you do worry about it because you want to make sure that the customer, you know, when you're in a business that deals with a wide variety of demographic of customer, that's when it's very difficult, I think. If you're in a business that's very aimed at, you know, the younger generation or something like that, who are very savvy on all this stuff, you know, whatever, you can be fairly focused and you can narrow in and say, well, you know, they'll want self-checkout, they'll want an app, they're not going to want anything else, you know, sort of thing. But if you're in a business, like a bank or a supermarket or, an insurance company, or there's plenty of other companies in the same boat, where you're dealing with, the full spectrum of the demographic. I heard on the radio yesterday they're going to get rid of checks. And then my first thought was, oh God, my father will love that, because the older generation grew up with checks and that's all they ever used, right? They like their check, So, it's a bit like when banks started closing branches and putting ATMs out the front, and then they started closing ATMs, and you've got to use your app, or you got.
Change is hard.
Change is very hard, and I feel sorry for the generations that haven't been brought up with the sort of technology, or don't feel they have the skills or whatever to do it, or the access to it. I think that makes it very hard. And so when you do, a board does have to be mindful when we start talking about things going heavily into a self-service sort of thing, that we're not disadvantaging certain sectors of our demographic. And it's not just age related as well. It could be disability, it could be all sorts of things. So you do have to do that, but there is also, unfortunately, a little bit of moving with the times. So some of that comes into play as well, yeah.
What a privilege to be able to hear Wendy speak today. I think you'll all agree. Thank you very much for being so open and sharing your experience and obviously your wisdom. So I would like to ask you all to give a round of applause, and thank you very much. Thank you very much to our online audience as well. And with that, I will bring it to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. What a great conversation.
Okay.
Very good.